medium is. Media are plural. Media are story-sharing environments. That's what media are. And so we live in the most media-saturated culture that the world has ever seen. Now, anyone who is over the age of 40 will tell you that this is a radically new proposition. If you spin the dial back 10,000 years to ancient Sumeria and then you run that dial up to the present, you will not find a more media-saturated culture than our own. But anyone over the age of 40 will tell you that we grew up in a very different media culture when we were kids. Books, for example, were few and far between. There were a few on the shelf. You could check out a few from the public library. Every once in a while in my neighborhood, the bookmobile would roll through. And us kids would pile onto the bookmobile and check out a few books, take them home, and wait for the next triumphant return of the bookmobile. Newspapers and magazines. I read one newspaper as a kid. It was the one that the newspaper boy threw from his bicycle onto my porch every day at 5 o'clock. It was called the Citizen Register, or as we like to call it, the Citizen Disturber. It was owned by the largest corporate commercial media chain in the country, Gannett News. Radio and television channels were few as well. I grew up with four, count them, four television stations in my world. ABC, CBS, NBC were the big three corporate commercial broadcast stations, and born around the same time I was PBS, public television. I learned how to count in part with Sesame Street, practiced my phonetics with Electric Company, shh, oot. And Mr. Rogers taught me to put on a sweater, tie my own shoes, and be kind to my neighbors. To leave a movie, to see a movie uncut and uninterrupted when we were kids, we actually had to leave our house and go to what was called a theater, in which there was a single screen that would play the same movie over and over for weeks before the next one would come. And the internet, when we were kids, simply did not exist. I remember traveling around looking at colleges when I was a high school senior in 1985, and I was on one tour, and the religion major tour guide was boasting proudly that his religion department was going to be the first department on campus to be wired to this new thing called the World Wide Web. And I remember thinking at that moment, as a high school senior, will God be on the internet? And if so, what's her email address? Now, all of those experiences I just outlined for you, books, magazines, newspapers, television, radio, movies, the internet, all can be done, of course, on this single convergent digital media device, this mobile multimedia story capture and delivery device. We live in the world's most powerful media culture, a digital media world of abundance, rather than the world that we grew up in, a world of media scarcity. And this is why media literacy education is so important and more vital than ever before in today's world. Traditionally, literacy has meant the ability to read and to write, mostly focused on words. Media literacy education is about blowing up that definition, about expanding it to consider the unique power of images to persuade us, to look at the ubiquity of our digital media environments that we crawl into every day, moment by moment, and how they impact us. We can define media literacy education in 4 action verbs: access, analyze, evaluate, and produce. We can define media literacy education in 3 overlapping arenas: greater knowledge, skills, and activism. If we had to pick a 2-word concept to define media literacy education, it would probably be this one: Socratic dialogue. Socrates and the Greeks taught us decades, millennia ago, to ask critical questions of our life experience, and certainly media is a deep and abiding part of that. The economists teach us about opportunity costs, about trade-offs. Every time we have a media experience, good things happen and bad things happen, and a media literate person understands both the good and the bad. If we're to define media literacy education in a single word, it would be skepticism. Not to be confused with cynicism, because cynics lie on the couch with the TV remote and a bad case of the net flu, watching reruns over and over again, because they're convinced, cynics are, that they cannot make a difference in the world. Skeptics, on the other hand, put down the remote, get up off the couch, and move into the world to try and make the world a better place. Skepticism is key to really good media literacy education. There's a saying that the fish seldom thinks or is conscious about the water in which it swims. Media literacy education is about teaching us, the fish, to think more critically, to be more conscious of the water in which we swim, which are our media environments. Media literacy education often starts with a really good media text. I'm looking over at the soundboard. Here's one now. Let's take a look. I'll start it again. It's really good, I promise. Oh. All right, let's cue that up again. Ready? Media literacy education often starts with a really good text. We'll start from the beginning.
Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
We're all kind of feeling the burn right about now, aren't we? It's true. So, a media literate person will immediately sort of engage the text, and start asking some critical questions of that text. What reality, quote unquote, is being constructed here? What stories are left out? What production techniques are being used to create meaning? What individual messages and individual meanings do you find in this text? How does this text make you feel? I myself, actually, can I get that back up? I myself am, having watched this a number of times, am really sort of haunted by this opening frame in this 1-minute commercial for Bernie Sanders. We've got kind of a ramshackle barn in the foreground with the American flag. We've got this old electrical wire collection here. We got what looks to be like a rusted old farm tractor, maybe an automobile in the front. And then in the background, of course, we have the promise of sort of a more renewable, a more resilient future. And having watched this a bunch, it struck me that this is a fantastic illustration of the paradox of our own time right now. We live in a world of digital media abundance, and yet all of us as humans on the planet are bucking up against some really very clear physical limits, as the climate change researchers, as the peak oil theorists are telling us. And this is the paradox of our time. We live in a world of digital media abundance, seemingly endless stories, and yet we are confronting also a world of physical limits. And that's what's haunting me about this particular scene. In 1976, the great Italian media observer, his name was Umberto Eco, made a very prophetic observation. But Eco was an essayist and a novelist and a semiotician. He devoted his life to studying media signs and symbols. And in 1976, he wrote, "A democratic civilization will save itself," he said. "A democratic civilization will save itself only if it makes the language of the image into a stimulus for critical reflection, not an invitation for hypnosis. I think too often our digital media age of abundance hypnotizes us. And it's media literacy education that has the power to break that spell. This is the great creative and educational challenge of our time, I think, in the 21st century, to square the paradox of living in a digital media age of abundance on a very physical and finite planet. So let us all practice together meditating on our media, because in fact, the survival of democratic civilization itself could be at stake. Thank you.